So let's begin. Clicker. So this is the first slide, and is also the first case. As you come into the room, and you will immediately turn left, you will find an interesting case. So this was meant to be both the bookends of the exhibition, so the Gutenberg Bible, or the Gutenberg project, and Manuzio's, or an example of Manuzio's productions. And in the background, I decided to include also a Ming note. Just as a reminder that in fact, printing, as well as printed books, xylographic books, existed before the printing revolution in Europe. As the label will say, in fact, Marco Polo noted, recounted the use of paper money in China. And this is an excellent example. Once you're at the exhibition, don't forget to walk around the case, because we put it in plexiglass so that you can see that in the back, in the front too, but it's really faint, in the back there are two seals that in fact made the note authentic. Most of the example of this kind of notes, you can hardly see anything. So this is a good example, and you'll see how big it is also. I was, I always read I always read the dimension, but then when you come to it, wow, I'm like, this is big. And of course, this is not paper, this is bark, mulberry bark to be precise. So bookends, and of course, we are starting from the Gutenberg Bible. Well, are we starting? Well, we might do without a clicker. Right? Manually. Nothing's happening. Aha. Okay, it just needs to wake up. This is your not quite your typical Gutenberg leaf. Of course, you have a large initial, two more initials in the back. So those who collected here, chose well. And I am offering you this detail here of the initial, not because I want you to look at the red initial, but because I want you to look in between the initial, right here. If you can see, you can sort of read the three-dimensionality of the types from the back of the leaf. In fact, I always joke that even a blind person can tell apart a manuscript from an early printed books, because in fact, the paper of the early printed books have a definite three-dimensional character. The other characters, in spite of what is often remarked, here I'm just going to use you can't read it. I'll read it to you. Christopher de Hamel, meeting with remarkable manuscripts above all, or at least among his many publications. Let me quote him. Of course, he worked at Oxford, the British Library, etc. It is often asserted that the Gutenberg Bible was made to resemble a medieval manuscript. Of course, nobody would have thought of it like that. I concur. In spite of the fact that a lot of people have said exactly the opposite. De Hamel He simply said it is often asserted. Well, I think most of us have read Eisenstein, and she said exactly this. You cannot tell apart a manuscript from a printed book. Sure you can. And sure, the people who bought or used early printed books, wouldn't have mistaken a printed book for a manuscript. And here I am giving you an illustrious example for a very interesting comparison that is set up at the Library of Congress in the Great Hall. The copy of the Gutenberg Bible here, the B42, with the Great Bible of Mainz. It is a great Bible here. Here they stand side by side. In terms of size, it's truly about almost twice the size, certainly in weight, it's twice the size of the Gutenberg Bible, which is already a really large book. This is actually out of a few hours I had there that were quite memorable. But it's not from Mainz. That's just a collecting added characteristic. So how can you tell, or what would have a Renaissance person noticed when they picked up, say, the Gutenberg Bible? Well, there are some really obvious characteristics that stand out. We already said the three-dimensionality of the paper, but that's you actually need to really go up close and touch it, etc. The things that immediately jumped out are the regularity of the letters. So, for instance, in a printed book, the ascenders and descenders will never jump the line. Never, ever. That happens all the times, even with the most experienced scribes. So a scribe, for instance, a descender might come here or might come here, and they have to think about when they write the next line, how's that going to affect the words they are writing. So there is a definite order that is unprecedented in printed books. The other obvious difference between manuscripts and printed books is the ink. The ink, this is a water-based ink that scribes always used. Instead, Gutenberg, and this was one of the key technical inventions of the Gutenberg project, this is an oil-based ink, very rich in metal. Particularly, in fact, so rich this one kind of sparkles a little. He actually changed the mix along the way. Several labs have done work on the Gutenberg Bible. It's interesting to see that the recipe changed along the way, but it remained quite remarkable. Finally, as you can tell, scribes didn't know anything about justifying. Of course, printers, they got the left justification for free, but Gutenberg and many that followed and will see the case, in fact, worked relatively hard this is not justified, by the way, but it's pretty regular. So to create, in fact, a text block. In this case, he was just making sure that his columns retain a certain regularity. In fact, I think he was truly after density, something that scribes couldn't quite do. Between the ink and the spacing, there is no leading, by the way. It is the look that the Gutenberg came to like. In fact, so of course, this is a leaf from a really big book. Right. At the Library of Congress comes in 3 volumes, for instance. And here is Amos. This is the leaf that you have here. Here is another example. So it's just one leaf. And I like to call them the production model. There was a prototype. Gutenberg worked extensively, invested in extensively in defining types and the columns. At the beginning of the project, the quote-unquote B42, the 42-line Bible, was in fact a 40-line Bible. And here I give you an example. So how can you tell them apart? Well, which one is the one that is darker? That's always what you need to ask. Here is another example, a different page. This is the production model, and this is the prototype. Just in case it's not vellum, it's not the page, reverse, etc. Same thing here. You can see the difference. Visually, it's a little different. This is 40 line, this is 42. The difference being, it's not just the number of lines, is that the 42-line column is in fact slightly shorter than the 40-line column. How was that done? In fact, we don't know. But there are 2 options. So the typefaces are exactly the same, a little bit squashed. They seem to be carrying more ink, the 42 line types. So how was it done? Well, again, there are 2 options. You can recast your characters on a smaller body, or you can file your types just so slightly, so that they are a little shorter. And this is exactly what happened there. Either way, it is, if you've ever done any printing, this is a crazy idea. And people always said, oh, he did it to save money. Of course, 42 lines, it is 5% more than 40 lines. So in theory, you're saying maybe he saved 5% on cost. Don't forget. So the Gutenberg Bible was printed mainly on paper, but about 40 to 45 copies were printed on vellum. In fact, there should be a separate project because if you start counting, each vellum Bible is about, it involves the skins of about 200 animals. It's a lot, yeah, well, lots of people ate a lot of meat that year. But it would have disrupted the production and market of vellum for a couple of years. And in fact, I think it was a recurrent situation, this kind of demand for vellum. But that's an aside. So did he save any money? Well, if you either filed the type or recast all of your types, and he had 260 some characters, you're wasting at the very least 2 weeks, maybe a month, at least, like if you're really working and you're saving 5% in the costs of your material. So at the end of the day, maybe you're saving 1 or 2% for the total cost of the project. And you say, hey. And then I tell you, well, so Gutenberg started with a 40 line, then he printed 1 page with a 41 line column. So he did this filing, recasting of some of it twice. Nobody in their right mind would do that to save 2% of your costs. He did it for a different reason. He did it not because he couldn't have added 2 more lines to the 40 column, but in fact, he just wanted a far tighter column, blacker column. Visually, you will see in the exhibitions, these are graphic tanks, virtually impenetrable. In fact, they don't invite reading, although it's very simple to read them once you get adjusted, but they are remarkable visually. After Gutenberg, and of course, Fust, Schoeffer, etc., there were years of further experimentation. In fact, the next few books that the Gutenberg print shop, even if it wasn't there, or the Schoeffer, Fust Schoeffer workshop produced, offered incredible graphics on top of new typefaces, printed initials in 2 colors, all sorts of incredible books. They survive very few examples of that, but they're incredible. But this experimentation continued into the 60s, 1460s, and I chosen for the exhibition one example, which is the Catholicon. We have a leaf of the Catholicon, and here just a slide from the Newbery that just shows you these people seem not to like to repeat typefaces. For whatever reason, they had the itch of creating typefaces every other year or every year, which is an incredible expense. So we have a Catholicon leaf, and I put it together with 2 other seemingly innocuous, they're all, in fact, seemingly uninteresting off the cuff, leaf in one case, because it works very well and is very efficient. But take, for instance, the Catholicon, part of another big book, not quite as big as the Gutenberg Bible, but it's a big book, which is some sort of basically a dictionary, an encyclopedic dictionary, which is always very nice. This is an example of the first page here. The 2P is always very nice, involving zillions of little initials here, added by an illuminator or really skilled rubricator for it. They survive in a good number of copies, so this was an effort. What is interesting about the Catholicon is that it wasn't, in fact, printed from movable types. Number one, so this goes to the experimental nature of early printing. This is when printing was still done by a handful of, quite literally, less than 5 shops. It is printed from slugs that are made from, they take an impression from movable types. And what is super funny about this book, particularly funny, relatively speaking, because it has become quite a matter of intense discussions among scholars, is that, so some copies were printed on vellum, and that's okay, but a lot of copies were also printed on paper. And it is printed on 3 different stacks of papers. And what is also very interesting is that the colophon says, and this is printed in 1460, but 2 out of the 3 types of paper were not in existence in 1460. In fact, we have proof that some were used in 1468-69 and the other batch in 1472. Okay, all fun and game. But then what is super interesting is that you cannot tell them apart. So the way in which they are printed is exactly the same. So then nothing was moved. Which implies that, oh my God, somebody kept all these slugs someplace in order for years to save what? The money that it involved, resetting? That's crazy. We will never do that. But if the paper tells the truth, that's the case. We can't believe it. I mean, nobody, in fact, that's why scholars are really up in arms because, well, this makes zero sense. Once you're at the exhibition, squint. You can, in fact, see that this page was printed from 2-line slugs because if you look very carefully, left justification is compromised, just so slightly. You see that this M and this M don't match. So it's here, there is a little bit of a step there. If you are printing regularly from movable types, that will never happen. But in fact, we have other proofs. In fact, at some point, there are actually 2 lines that are inverted, a mistake. So we have proof that these were printed from slug. So in any case, stands to prove this experimental nature of early printing. The other 2 leaves that I have there, they are, again, proof that the collecting here, even the leaves, was done with incredible purpose. So one comes from Strasbourg, 1470, an unremarkable book. In fact, it is remarkable in other, from a graphic perspective. This was printed by the so-called R printer. So it is famous, collectors like to have him because you can see why he was called the R printer. It's a really peculiar R. Once you're there, squint and you'll find an example of it. But what is interesting is that the R printer did a decent job in justifying the type page. I'll show you much better in a little bit. Justifying the type page on the right. Why did he do that? Because by 1470, a number of printers had started justifying. In fact, the one that started it, and there are two different printers that start exactly at the same time, both working on the Bible, but I think Mentelin takes, Johann Mentelin takes precedence. He started the Bible completely unjustified, or relatively unjustified, and 2/3 of the way through, he actually started justifying, or getting pretty close to the notion of justification. The connection to the R printer is that the R printer married Johann Mentelin's daughter, and eventually they were printing at the same time, but eventually the R printer took over the shop of Mentelin. Of course, if your father-in-law is justifying, you are also going to justify as long as he's around. You'll justify it on the right just fine. Especially if you're thinking he's going to hand me all those types. The other leaf has to do with this, again, similarly unremarkable page here. A good example of this focus on the blackness in Germany. You'll see how things will change soon enough. In fact, it comes from a book that is quite remarkable because it shows how some early printers started tinkering with the finishing of the page. In Augsburg, in 1471-72, the scene was dominated by somebody named Gunther Seiner. He was good. He was really good, and he printed a lot of woodcuts, and eventually got around to printing initials. This printer here, he's doing exactly that. So this is a page out of this book here, and in that book, many of the initials are printed. Not all. Here, in fact, so I went back. This is not a volume that I usually remarked upon, but this was the occasion. So this is a copy at the Cantway library. You can see that some initials are printed and then colored some, and some are not. Why this and not that? TBD, I would say maybe the typesetter screwed up. The initial, at least here, maybe, I don't know, they didn't have in any case, we don't know, but we can see that this is 5 lines and that is 6 lines. So if you only have a 6-line initial, then that one is not going to fit. Here are other examples. In fact, so this is the first initial, the opening of the volume. Of course, that one you will never print. You will leave to the very experienced, in fact, this is gold, illuminator. The rest can be filled in by the assistant or somebody less gifted. What I found, what is interesting to me in this volume, and of course, this is volume by volume, and I haven't seen as many to really say, yeah, this is what it is. But, so okay, some initials are done just by hand, where whenever there isn't an infrastructure printed underneath. And then the one that are finished, so the one that were printed and finished by the illuminator, instead of completely coloring the entire initial, created a hybrid printed and color aesthetics. That's, I think, a very interesting and new kind of sensibility. The printed part, the printed lines are good, are integrated. Other illuminators would just cover the whole thing. Here, I see evidence that, no. In fact, by the time, on occasion, he has to create one, and what he chooses to do is, in fact, to mimic the same initials that were printed. This is a whole topic for a different lecture, but so this leaf here seems like it's just a leaf. In fact, it's not. It's part of a very interesting project giving us a sense of printers thinking about how to finish the page. Gutenberg and his shop printed initials. Most other printers, they gave up because usually it involves registration. A good registration is really difficult. The way we do it today with masking is not what they were doing. And in fact, actually, Gutenberg tried it out in the Bible. He printed some of the red titles, and rather quickly he gave up because there was overlapping ink. Overlapping ink defies the whole regularity of printing. So he gave up. But later, the shop mastered those techniques. Let's take a look. Let's cross the Alps, go to the next vitrine, and enjoy the 3 books here. I chose 2 examples from Venice and 1 from Rome. So a Jenson, of course, very famous name. Swanham and Panhard, absolutely. They are the one who brought movable type printing to Italy and were a big business in the late 60s and early 70s in Rome. And then the De Spira workshop. Again, another very important firm in Venice. In fact, De Spira, the brother Johannes, he's the one that introduced printing in Venice. Let's see, do this. So, crossing the Alps, Swanham and Panhard, probably trained in Mainz, produced a number. They were probably invited by Cardinal Torquemada, very important theologian of maybe the most important theologian of the 15th century, who actually sent them to Subiaco. If you've never been to Subiaco, take the bus, go. It's worth your time. There is a reason why Saint Benedict chose Subiaco as a place to set up shop. It is simply beautiful. Of course, Torquemada sent Swanham and Panhard there for the free labor of the monks and the quiet, so that they wouldn't stray from the path. The Swanham and Panhard relatively quickly, in 2 years, they decided, yeah, it's nice and quiet here, but we want to be in Rome. That's when, that's where the business is. So, and what is interesting to see is that in Subiaco, they had one set of types, pretty dark. As soon as they moved to Rome in 68, they printed also two of the same titles they had printed in Subiaco, and you can see the side-by-side difference. What did they choose to do? So the new set of types, far less heavy than the Subiaco types, the Roman, the types they developed for Rome in their Roman typeface, are yes heavy, but nowhere as heavy as the Subiaco one. Again, there is a Gutenberg factor that you need to keep in mind, and the blackness of the page. The volume that we have here is open on the first page. Of course, you want to focus on the colors and the illumination, and I want you to instead look at the text block and the types. Oops. Right. What is clear is that just like Gutenberg, Swanholm and Panhard never got around to justifying anything. They didn't marry the right daughter, I suppose. But so they had an entire publishing career, and they never justified their pages. In fact, some are pretty ragged. I mean, you can tell that they really didn't care, to a degree at least, or they never really cared to make it really good. The one who cared were up north in Venice. As you go to this vitrine, you will find I've chosen this page here of one of the first publication by Janson. Janson, Nicolas Janson, was a Frenchman, but he trained in Mainz with Gutenberg. In fact, the King of France has sent Janson to train in the Gutenberg shop. And he stayed there about almost 3 years. What is interesting is that he did that between 58 and 60, 61. And then he goes back to France. There isn't funding there, and then we don't know anything about Janson until he shows up in Venice with those very remarkable types. The typeface, Roman typeface that he developed, it's among the, the most beautiful, or at least we have always been taught that that's the case. I opened it in this page here because for two reasons. Well, sure, you will focus on the types, but you will also see that, wow, this copy was used, was really used. Take a look at some of the annotation, like so minute, is incredible. And over the years, a number of people worked on this volume. And of course, somebody here took a break at some point, couldn't resist, and doodled that. However, this volume here, it's a good example of the quality of the collection of La Casa del Libro. So early Janson, he published 5 titles in 1470. We don't know which one came first. In fact, we have clear ideas, but in any case, officially we don't know. In this case, the Cicero Rhetorica, who bought Cicero's Rhetorica in the Americas? The usual suspects. The Morgan, Huntington, Houghton, okay, the Gordon families, and Rosenwald bought 2 copies. That's it, and La Casa del Libro. So this is a super priced item, and it tells you the kind of collecting that was done here, the thinking. So it's in a certain type of a league of a collection. So keep that in mind. Here is a good example of pages down the road, so to speak, as you flip through. Okay, the fewer annotation, thank God. But so Janson was banking on his types. They are indeed beautiful. He never, or at this point in 1470, he didn't yet master what the Spira workshop had become had mastered, which is justifying and spacing letters. The negative space becomes a thing in Venice. If you've ever done any typesetting, you were going to say, oh my God, what happened there? At the same time, why didn't he move a space from here or there and put it there? You know, the oratories, lots of problems here. They are beautiful, but the spacing in between letters, it's something, as well as the exact justification, is something that Jenson, he hasn't mastered yet. The one who, and here is just an aside, so, and I concur. We have an idea of what came first in 1470 within the Jenson production by looking at the quote-unquote freshness of the types. This is the Eusebius, and as you can tell, that's paper. This is vellum. Yeah, they look good. But what's actually very interesting in this colophon is the substitution here and the attention to that A. Surely Jenson printed first the vellums and later the paper. What is interesting here is that instead of a U, he used a Y to which he had cut the leg. Very interesting, you think, mistake. In fact, it would be a reference to what else was going on in Venice. If you look carefully, as I have done on other occasions, at what the Spira was doing, they had mastered this kerning thing. In fact, they had really made it into a specialty of what they were producing. Kerning has become so that the filing or cutting the types so that the space in between the two letters works better. It's something that printers do relatively regularly. Of course, once you make a change to the type, you cannot undo it. That type, that's that. Either you're going to reuse it that way or you're throwing it. But in any case, on to the example of the Spira that we have that I've chosen here. This is a quote-unquote run-of-the-mill. The Spira, it's a good example, in fact, of the Spira. And I open it on the first page here in spite of the initial that was filled in, or quote-unquote filled in. Somebody probably in the late 16th or early 17th century decided to add a letter there. The other ones are all done like this. If you look, justification here is much better. But we are in 1471. The Spira has already he's already done his best work. But before we get to it, what is interesting, and you should train your eyes, there is a note in this volume, somebody probably late 17th, early 18th century, remarking about the hoc unum scio editionem Vindelianam esse characteris nitidioris quam Romanam. What they are talking about is that, so the Spira, this is the second edition. The first edition was brought out of Cyprianus by Suano and Panarts. And he's passing judgment saying, yeah, the one by the Spira, it's cleaner, it's better. And characteris, in this case, is talking about, yes, the types, but also the type page. Indeed, if you look at Suano and Panarts, limited justification. Conversely, this was routine justification, which gives the text block a clear identity and quite a neat look, a geometric look. If we were to consider the beginnings of the Spira workshop in Venice, Johannes, the brother of Vindelinus, started. He died that year. And what is interesting to see is that within the span of a couple of months, he brought out 2 editions of Cicero's Epistole. And why, you know, we say, well, why you're doing that? That's crazy. It's not. It's not. If you think that this is just not good enough, you can do so much better. And this is the first page, first edition, second edition, weeks apart, maybe a couple of months apart. Not only he decided that, okay, I need to fix that. This is the next chapter. This just one line on the first page looks bad. But then if you start looking at the justification, this is better. If you then turn the page of the second edition, this is a page, and you look at the next one here, justification here is done at on a different level. Not only super straight, he reworked the text so that no word would be broken. On top of it, all of the characters are, or they have a definite presence, so no punctuation at the end of the line. That is something that will take you hours to do. And it has no return in terms of money. You're not going to sell more or less copies, but surely this is going to take you several more weeks to produce than one that is, I mean, a good justification, but this is something else. Yeah, those people. Year 1 of printing in Venice. See, these people were investing their time in how pages look. The next vitrine here, I'm taking the pulse as well as foregrounding the revolution, the rattle revolution. So Jenson, minor revolution in his own world, he gave up his very famous types. So the Roman types are out the window. And people say, oh, he wanted to save money. Well, he really wanted to save money. He wouldn't have printed in 2 columns. That's one sure way in which you're not saving any money. In fact, you're probably making it longer than it has to be. Conversely, I mean, if you don't have 2 columns, which with this relatively dark Gothic here, it would really be heavy on the eye. So in here, I'm giving you the vitrine comparison. And here is the colorless side-by-side comparison at Houghton. Because, okay, this is great, or at least it was intended to be. The coloring instead of Rattold's calendarium was not intended to be. It was intended to be a plain black and white. Somebody down the road in the 17th century probably felt the need to add color and ruin my page. So let's take the polls here, and what is interesting, so this is a super famous page because by and large, this is the first title page ever, or a title page printed in a book of any consequence. Title page, what we understand as title page means something that tells you who wrote it, what is it, the content, when it was printed, who printed it, etc. So something that we expect, something that didn't exist at the time. What is interesting is that Rattold, when he came to Venice in 1476, might have gotten that idea by looking at Jenson and his competition here. That very book that we have in the vitrine was published the same year by another printer in Venice. And what is striking about these 2 publications is that both of them include, yes, Liber Primus, but also who printed it. That's also news. So this idea of putting forth your name as a printer right there was novel. Of course, no proof, but this is, again, unprecedented, and then it's followed by rattled calendarium title page. This is what's here. So there is a very nice copy. The problem with this copy, again, is that somebody felt the need to add color. This is a copy that has lived, as you can tell here, 1763. It was used. It was used for a long time. And in the binding it shows, in the dirt here it shows, and the color. That's great. But for our eyes, we want to look at clean copies. This is what Rattled had in mind. This is what most copies look like. So Rattled and his partners came to Venice. The first thing they printed is the calendarium, Regiomontano's calendarium. They printed it in Latin and Italian at the same time. 2 years later, this is just for reference, I'm going to come back to this, they printed it in German. I don't know how many German there were in Venice, but I guess enough to justify publishing it. But it might also have been just published for the glory. Book history comes to this title page from some famous comments that are always made. Rattle this, rattle that. Here I give you from Prince and People, the first this, the first that, the first the other. So in fact, the quotation is the most important printer, Rattled, after Gutenberg himself. That's what's behind there, so that you can't see it. And he printed in gold. Yes, this is out of the Euclid. One of the first people to print in gold, which is actually not quite true. There are initials printed in gold in a 1472 Pliny at the New York Public Library, so that's a Jensen enterprise. But in any case, so the first one, he printed the titles, the initials, and some other things in gold. But in any case, so first this, first that, very inventive, check. And it's always Rattled. Well, Rattled in 1476 was one of three. It was a partnership, but eventually we lost the partners somehow. And what is interesting is that the first one is called himself Victor, maybe in charge of the graphics, we don't know. In another colophon here, this is in the first page of the calendarium, in a regular colophon the year later, we learned that the last member of the partnership is actually a correctore ac socio, so the person that looked after the text, maybe. Why did they printed a calendarium? Well, calendarium had a history here. We know nothing, by the way, about Rattle before he came to Venice. And people always speculate, oh, he must have learned printing or trained under Regiomontanus. This is Regiomontanus' calendarium. Regiomontanus, the most important astronomer and mathematician of the 15th century. In the early 1470s, he realized that if he wanted to change the course of how science and mathematics were studied going back to classics, he had to print by himself those works. And he really had quite an agenda. He died. He never quite got around to do all of this. But he printed his calendarium, and here I'm giving you some comparison here. So this is Rattled, quote unquote, 1476, a partnership against Regiomontanus. Here is Regiomontanus against something that was probably the follow in its footsteps here, a block book of a calendarium. There are a few copies of that. So the partners here took the calendarium by Regiomontanos and made it bigger and better. And on top of it, so better the types, better the images, better the initials, of course, the title page. And then, so there is the title page side by side with a nice empty nothing. That's when you open Regiomontanos Calendarium, like all of the other books at the time, there is a nice blank page. That's making waves here. That's when you open the 1476 Calendarium. So the other big difference between the two editions is that Regiomontanos, can you tell the difference? Squint. Look at the red numbers. Rattled, the partnership printed those red numbers. Regiomontanos had some schmuck add the numbers. He printed about 1,000 copies of this. It's about 1 million numbers that were added. Regiomontano died a year later. We don't know why. He died. He died. It is true. Just to delight your eyes, so see, these are some of the initials that the Rattled partnership designed for the calendarium, these foliated initials. And the types are, humbly speaking, as good as those by Jensen, I think, if not better. But let's return just for a moment to the this very famous title page. So Italian and Latin, around which he put a nice, interesting border, classical in feel. There is a vase here and then some kind of a plant growth here. Intended to stay just as a pattern, not to be colored. Nice black and white. What is polychrome here on the first page are the initials and the names of the printer in red. Remarkable. What is also remarkable is how neatly the other types were set to, in fact, create echoes with the initials. It is a Q, an A, and an A. The V here starts there, so everything is thought through very carefully. Very few people ever read what this thing says. The two quote-unquote title pages are somewhat different, not somewhat, they are different in terms of text. The Latin one is pretty standard fare from our perspective, unremarkable. It's just, okay, so this is what it is, and the printers are at the bottom. The Italian, in fact, includes what is a marketing device. If you read the last few lines, he says, coglierai tal frutto, a ciò non grave sia in breve tempo. So all of the thing that you can learn from the calendarium, e con pochi penesse, without spending that much money. So I don't know how cheap it was, but chi teme col tal spese scampa virtù. So if you're not buying this, you are a cheapo. I nomi di impressori sono qui da basso di rossi colori. Remarkable. Enticing. He must have sold a bunch. Next vitrine, I take you to the 1477, so the next year. The partnership, and these are the volumes there. The partnership produced 3 books. Here I give you the examples. The Appianos, the Cepius, the Situs Orbis, Dionigi, here by Dionigi. We have the Appianos and the Cepio. Remarkably, this is very few collections have that kind of richness of rattled partnership. As you can tell, if you were to look around the copies, the partnership came up with borders, initials, and were really keen on polychrome printing. Some of the borders were printed in red and some in black. There is no rhyme to it. In fact, some of the initials inside were printed in red, in black, in whatever copy you find. What is striking is that this, check that. This idea of the title page that resonates with us. Oh, the first title page. Done. Didn't go back to that. Didn't go back to these typographics. Yeah, they created borders all right. And these are night and day. In fact, quite literally, these are, if printed in black, they're about black and white, and they're about negative space. Here you are printing the forms, the patterns. Here you're printing the ground. That was new. Same thing with the initials, a whole set, small and big. Absolutely remarkable. The partnership in printing the pianos was taking on the establishment. They came to Venice, 1476, perfect nobodies. They start with the calendarium. The next year, boom, again, reinvent the wheel. The pianos had been printed by no less than the Spira. The Spira, renowned print shop. So here is a good comparison side by side at Houghton. And you can see this is exactly how the Spira was meant to be, fully decorated. They start the text, so the introduction or the letter of dedication is in fact switched around. So, but in any case, so in fact the S, the initial S that you find here, it's anticipated in rattled by the other letter, by the letter of dedication. What is interesting to see is that all of these had to be filled in by hand, and they, including, so they produced a finished page. Border, initial, and all of the textual notation that you need to find your way into the pianos. You turn the page, so first you find that border, that initial, you turn the page, you find the big S, you turn one more page, and you find all of these nice L's, a little smaller. In here, you find a nothing. You are adding it yourself if you want to. And this is true throughout the volume. The partnership was producing finished pages. Everybody else banked on the buyer to bring it to the illuminator and the rubricator to add all of these elements. If we take a look at the other little book, it's exactly the same idea. Border, slightly smaller. Again, white on black. A wealth in terms of typographic material. If you turn this page here, you find a different Q, a larger Q. They could have reused the same Q here. No. They show off. We have a bigger Q, not just one Q. And here are a couple more examples of the initials. Again, they are all a new type of aesthetics here. I'm still not calling it a black and white because some of these, in fact, were printed in red. But it's clearly they are thinking about negative space and the potential of negative space. Here is just for your eyes to enjoy the types and the initials. This is one of the two copies printed on vellum of the Cepio. This is the one in Houghton. Yes, this is the one in Houghton. Remarkable, just incredible, beautiful types. Sorry, I'm rushing a little here, otherwise we'll never make it to that cocktail. Next vitrine, I give you what happened after the partnership that fell apart. First, one member sometimes in 1478 jumped ship. Remember, the German calendarium only had 2 printers at the bottom. By 1479, partnership is done. In fact, certainly one of the partners will continue on its own, and of course, Rathold went on to make it will become one of the biggest names in printing in the 15th century. Rathold by himself, he stays in Venice until 1486, and then he goes back to Augsburg, where again he'll print all the way into the 16th century, very famous. This vitrine gives you a sense of the transformation in his approach to the graphics. In 1482, yes, he reprinted the calendarium. Again, gone is the title page. He goes, in fact, he doesn't go back. That's a new border and a red printed initial with, of course, polychrome printing as well for the title. For the Pomponius Mela here, sorry that you can't read that, but it's a Cosmographia by Pomponius Mela. Of course, you have all the initials. He had printed that in 1478. He adds a very interesting map. Look at it when you're there. Think of it in terms of Quattrocento and both, of course, geographical notion, but also perspective and the classical elements. Look at these columns. That's where the thing is hanging. So that's 1482. He's still there creating initials, border, gung-ho about polychrome printing, smaller books, at least these. By the time 1483, 1484 comes along, and then 1485, he realizes polychrome printing, I can do it. I don't want it. It's going to be a black and white aesthetic, period. There are a couple of very good examples of 1485 printings in which, he could have printed this in red, like he has done here and here. This as well. In fact, he did that. He did those two, both the Publicius and the Hyginos in 1482 with the red titles. But here is an all black. It's visually far more powerful. Conversely, he's not just, reprinting stuff. He's actually, he's adding elements, he's adding woodcuts, he's rethinking the text. So in fact, perfecting books is not just trying to make money. And that is quite interesting. Here is the example here. So this is the 1478 version. This is what he prints in 1482. You can see it in 1478, they're all gung-ho about the border. And here the border is no longer, then there is nothing on the other page. What you want, it's a map, far more interesting. Calendarium, I'm not going to spend any time. This is night and day. This is, as you open it, on the inside, the 1482 calendarium is a smaller version, A through Z, of what they printed in 1476. So that's quite interesting. Again, we love this, first that, first title page. And he didn't do it again. Negative evidence that is very significant. Another example here, the Publicius, 1482, again, polychrome printing. 1485, all black. He added a number of woodcuts, again, as I mentioned here, 2 examples. He had several, so he's not just reprinting. The copy here of the Hyginos, we have 2 copies, by the way. This goes to the wealth of the collection. As an interesting example of censorship. This, as the other images suggest, is recurrent. It wasn't just one reader who had a problem there, a gender problem, to fix the gender. It was recurrent. For sake of brevity, I'm just going to jump to Manuzio's here. Manuzio is the next important wave makers as a printer and a publisher in Venice and throughout the world. And I've chosen here a couple of publications by Manuzio's, as well as a reminder of the legacy of Rattle. So Rattle, one of the most important volumes that he publishes is the Euclid, and the Euclid gets quote unquote copied again, this is proof of his legacy in the Veneto, in Vicenza in 1491. Very different type of graphics, as we'll see in a minute. But in any case, here, before I go, so I've chosen the first volume published by Manuzio, and then some excellent example of what became known as the pocketbook. We'll get to it in 1 second. Patience, one more. So these are just the different type of graphics and field. So Rattled with this black and white, this is 1482, so yeah, there it is. And that is 1491. Rattle is basking in glory with this black and white aesthetics. And the printers in Vicenza, in fact, followed what was at that point the popular type of graphics. At this point, in Venice, I don't like this distinction, but in any case, you have the classical style woodcuts. Think of the Ipner Automachia Polyphily. And then you have this popular type of graphic. This is not lack of skill. This is very purposeful. In fact, in Germany, this idea of the popular style was ever present. The publication here is pretty good, but again, it feels differently, it's a very different feel than the original, but it is part of the Rattle and a major legacy in Venice and the Veneto. Here is a good close-up comparison. On to Manuzio a moment. This is his first publication. Don't forget, Manuzio was not a printer by vocation. I mean, he started as a humanist, as a teacher. He came to printing a little bit later in life. And the key thing is that just like the art printer, he married the daughter of a printer, of an important Venetian printer, Torresani, who had also bought the types from Jenson at Jenson's death. So that there is a whole, some important connections there. As you can tell, this is a book intended for students who need to learn Greek. This is the only, or one of the very few, maybe not the only, I'm not sure. In any case, let's say the only one for the time being, book by Manuzio that has initials and borders. So he feels the need to print in that vein with the borders and the initials. And here are the initials. Especially the gamma here is so successful. I'm not crazy about it. Here is a close-up. In fact, he's starting out finally on his own. He had something printed by his future father-in-law in 1493, and this is 1494. He does it himself. He's still not clear about spacing and how and what is good typography. This M test, it really belongs here, but it will look so much better. Nonetheless, in a few years, he actually invented something. And this is, there is a key comparison at the exhibit. So Rattle in the 1480s, 82, 85, he printed smaller versions of bigger books. Still with all the, bells and whistles, the initials, this and the other, but they're just smaller books of larger versions. Manuzio understands that no, that's not how you make a successful small book. You have to rethink completely the graphics. So he doesn't quite invent, but makes it successful. The pocketbook, you'll see there, they are really small. They had a specific audience in mind in terms of the text. He published classics, Greek, Latin, as well as modern classics in this pocketbook version that were intended for learned readers, people who will read for leisure. So something you don't have to like log around, just quote unquote take to the beach. And this is a novelty. And for that, he not only devises a new typeface, the italic type, small but very readable. He also spaces things in such a way that is really easy to read. And of course, maybe following Rattold, he starts to have not quite a title page, but at least when you open a volume, you know what it is. So that's interesting. On this note, I think I've spoken enough here. This is, of course, Dante nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita. And a good example of Manuzio's modern classics being printed in this new format with this new look that he invented. All right, thank you for your patience. I think I ran a little long.